Hi there, welcome to this episode of Author Success Show. The special guest we have today is truly special because he is the author of not just one book, but 8 books. His name is Mark Villareal. Mark has over 25 years of experience building business organizations to achieve their highest success. Mark's expertise in leadership development has allowed him to teach others how to identify future leaders, implement innovative development and mentorship plans, and build a strong and successful culture that encourages excellence. His mission statement is to pay it forward by elevating leadership development one person, one team, and one organization at a time. Hello, Mark. Welcome to Author Success Show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's excited to be on.
It's a huge honor for me to have an author who has not just written one book, but you've published 8 books, right? When most authors, aspiring authors, struggle to finish one, it's really amazing and commendable that you've written so many books. But how did that first seed get planted in your mind? Or rather, when did that happen when you decided that I'm going to write a book someday?
Well, here's some good advice for others because procrastination kills. So, I had been, 35 years in corporate America, 21 years at the C level, meaning I reported to CEOs and presidents. So I've always had a passion for leadership and helping other people develop.
Mm.
And, I always read a lot. I got a lot of books I recommend to, other people that have helped me,
Right.
But I always thought that I had a story to tell as well. And that's where I wanted to write this book. I knew in what format I wanted to write it in. I'm a real big on storytelling. And so if you read my books, I tell stories.
Yeah.
And I wrote the book and it sat there. So I'll explain that I wrote it in about 2005. Wrote it out, thought it was pretty good.
But it actually got published in 2016, right? Shortcuts Get You Lost.
Correct. 2015, I think, or 16, it might be. But that's where it tells you that it sat there. I did some rewrites, and then it sat there. I was, comfortable in corporate America, making it a good living. But my wife, who is a godsend to me, said, are you going to do something with that? And I'm like, yeah, I think I have a story to tell. So that's where I worked on learning about the publishing business, self-publishing and typesetting and, putting it on all the sites, every little detail, ISBNs. And I've worked through the book. I've worked with, obviously I was recommending an editor that I was comfortable with. And I published the book, and it took, like you said, 10 years later, but that's only because of procrastination.
Right.
And procrastination, I teach it in leadership, is an enemy that we all have out there. Because the book did well, it opened my eyes to say, even my wife said, I never knew you were a writer. And so we laughed at that because that was book number 1. Yeah. And if you look at just a few years later, I'm on book number 8. And even the books I've written, with 8 books, 2 of them are children's books. So I actually ventured off in a different direction to write for children's books, although the books do focus on teaching children leadership as well through a story of park rangers. So my children's series is called The Adventures of Park Ranger Brock Cliffhanger and his junior park rangers. And they each take a setting in a different national park out here in the United States, but it teaches them lessons about safety, about conservation and preservation, and about the national parks and about role models, which park rangers, I think, make great role models in leadership.
This is amazing because, Mark, I can see this kind of a snowball effect. It took you 10 years to really take that action and publish the first book. But after that, every year you've been writing 1 or 2 books and, you've become a serial author now. So how do you actually pick the topic for your next book?
It's funny because at any given time, and most authors have a list of topics that they might write about. And so I can go into my computer and say, here's some subjects that I really want to write about. But what happens is life happens and something else will pop up. That brings the next topic to mind. So even my second book that I wrote wasn't even written down as a topic, But I started blogging after writing the first book, and I would, in my blogs, I would tell stories that what I learned growing up from my mother. She was a great influence on me. And I would make the quote that my mother was the best leadership coach who chose to be a housewife. So she was very influential. And I think most mothers are, but we need to really realize the impact that they make.
Yeah.
And so in my blogs and the stories, my following grew. I mean, my LinkedIn went to 30,000 very quickly. And I told my wife, I think that's telling me I need to write that story. So I wrote the book, Leadership Lessons from Mom. And I
Right.
wrote it in 3 months, which is very quick for a book, but it
Absolutely.
was in my heart and in my head. I just and it's 5 chapters from, kindergarten to after her death. But it really tells the stories. And what I like about it is that when people read it, even my editor said, well, I do this with my children. I'm like, that's awesome. I never said that you didn't, but now by reading this, maybe you realize the impact that you do have.
Yeah.
Because mothers are, to me, the first impact on most of the child's life. And my mom was real big on character and what that meant, and so that helped formulate me to who I was later in life. And even as she saw me grow as an adult, she would still teach me, come back to the same lessons, but maybe update them. And it was very effective. So even though, and I still have other topics I want to write about, but that took me to my second book. And that happens quite a bit. My millennial book is called The Millennial Factor, 10 Steps in Managing Millennials to Success. That was a hot topic that others would hear about. And there's a lot of myths out there about millennials are just hard to manage, and I think that because there are going to be 70% of the workforce, there's just a big influx that people would probably see the differences more because there's such a large portion. But I had success with millennials. And as I really thought about why I was successful and why I would see others that have success with them, it allowed me to debunk some of the myths, but also teach how to overcome some of the myths that if they may be true. And really, I will say that I explain this in the book. Someone that's just a really great manager, that in all the aspects where they're very transparent, they over communicate, they explain the why, which millennials love, are going to be effective with all age groups. And so that was just, fortunately, the skill that I had, that I realized, well, they really did enjoy when I did these things, and this really was effective. But I also teach in the book, you might hear the saying, millennials have an entitlement culture. Well, I think that I've met people in all the workforce groups, age groups, that some people have been entitled. And so I teach how I would eliminate that on day one from any age group, yet alone just millennials. And so, and it's really effective management. Effective managers will over communicate. They will set expectations even before they hire, during the interview, when they hire, and moving forward. They will not be afraid to set expectations, but they do it early and often. And I always say that great leaders repeat themselves constantly. And I would even have a sign that would hang in my office that comes from the book, The Rockefeller Habits, that it says, until your employees start mocking you, you haven't said your message enough. Just so, and I would even show that to them. Look, I repeat myself a lot. You might be cognizant of what I'm repeating because it might be important to me. So each one would come about in those ways.
Yeah. What I noticed, Mark, is though all your books look very different, like one is about lessons from mom, another is for women, and there are a couple of books are for children, but the common theme across all the books is leadership. So was that a very conscious decision because you are a leadership coach and a trainer yourself?
I would say you're absolutely right. And I think anything I would write, that just is part of who I am. So it's like, how could it not be about leadership? Because Leadership Lessons from Mom, The Millennial Factor. My newest one is a script for aspiring women Leaders, 5 Keys to Success. And then even the children's books are all about leadership. And I think that leadership is so important that we need people to understand that they don't have to be in a management position if they're in a company to be a leader. And that's why it's important for children to understand that leadership, as John Maxwell says, is influence, how you influence others. So for children to realize not only beware of those who influence them, but the influence that they have on others can be impactful. And that's why, what we teach in the children's books as well. So it's really to the heart of who I am. So I think my wife would agree. So she might even tell me sometimes, okay, I get it. But it's just ingrained in me very deeply.
Sure. So when you started writing, you must have discovered your own process for writing. But after having written so many books, has your process become better? If yes, could you just share that with us for the benefit of all those who are still struggling to write their first book?
My process has actually somewhat stayed the same. Has it gotten better? Yes. But I outline my thoughts on what I think the book would be, how many chapters, and what I want each chapter to say. It doesn't mean that stays the same, because as I start writing, it may expand to more. I need another chapter or deeper in the story, or let me change the topic of this chapter. But it helps me give a direction on which steps I'm going to take. Then I start outlining in each chapter what I want the story to tell and what I want people to end with it. It's part of, one of the books I preach to everybody, especially when I coach, is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Right. And one of them is begin with the end in mind. So I really work on each chapter on what's the end result I want when people finish this chapter that helps them segue into the next. And then I start writing, and do I get writer's block? Yes, I think every writer sometimes gets writer's block, and I'll relax. My wife has taught me to relax, and we pray on it. And it's funny because the next day I'll be amazed that one day I spent 18 hours behind because I'm like, I have it all right here. I can't stop. So one day you can't write 10 minutes. The next day you write 18 hours. But patience has really worked good for me in my writing. Sometimes when I think I want to write a book and here's a topic, I may have an idea of where I want to finish it by, but I'll be patient to make sure it really has the message I want it to tell.
Right. So you start out with a plan, but you're very flexible about it because you want it to naturally evolve as you write. And you also have certain rituals that you follow so that you write on a daily basis. Some days it could be more, some days it could be less, but you kind of try to be consistent, right?
Yeah, very consistent, and I think that with everything, I try to always get a good night's rest. That I have found that's very important. My wife will tell you, though, that I used to keep a pen and paper next to the bed because sometimes my best ideas just come when I sleep, and a lot of people are that way. Right. Or leadership lessons from Mom. She will tell you that I wrote a lot of that at 3 a.m. because it would just come to me. Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember how it happened. Because you have to remember the details to that it really helped it make the impact that we wanted it to make when we could explain what happened, how it happened, when it happened, and why it happened as well. So that was very important to the flow.
Sure. You also mentioned that the idea for the second book came after you got some great response for the blogs you were posting on LinkedIn. So for authors out there who are planning their future books, would you also suggest to them to create some kind of a platform so that they don't wait to put out their message until their next book is out, but also constantly keep creating content either for a blog or a podcast or a YouTube channel so that they are constantly in touch with their audience?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great suggestion. I started with LinkedIn. If you look now, I have a YouTube and everything else. Facebook and that. And each one I actually use differently now. It was just happened to be LinkedIn that I started the blog. It was on businesses, and I found that it really expanded my mind. Now I find that when I write blogs, I like it because I guess I would say it helps keep me sharp, that my mind working and active. And I do different things on my YouTube. I have like free 10-minute videos that may be up to 15 minutes, but I call them tidbits. And I have 3 different sections on YouTube. So, one section is tidbits. The others are just videos that are explaining maybe something my mom said, but on the tidbits, it really helps support those that go through my leadership training where we do workshops or we work one-on-one. But a lot of times I work with the leaders of a company, and it's like, I don't want my workshop just to be, hey, here's the 1 day or 3 days or how many days we work together and I'm gone. I want to provide them additional resources of information that they can relate to and say, oh yeah, I remember that. That's let me get back on track. And so that's how I utilize them. But it really has helped me in not only learning the platforms, because I was social media illiterate. I would still say I'm not the greatest, but you do need to learn them. And then it helps you find other things and what other people are doing as well. There's nothing wrong with looking at what other successful people are doing and saying, oh, okay, I could do something in that method or in that realm. And pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. I mean, we teach that in leadership, to push yourself outside your comfort zone, because that's where you really grow. And for me to teach that, I have to embrace it as well.
Yeah, I think this is very good advice, Mark, because a lot of people think that writers need to just lock themselves in a cabin and once the book is published, it will sell on its own. But you, in spite of being so successful in your industry, still understand the importance of learning all the new technology, being on social media, connecting with the millennials and the audience of today. So that's really like, if you are taking so much effort, then there is no excuse why others shouldn't. So what I noticed is you were always in the space of leadership and training, even before you became an author. So how has your business been impacted after you became an author?
Well, it's funny because it's when I became an author that I left corporate America that I said, let me go, I'll go into coaching. I sold the piece of the business that I was a part of. It was a small piece, but that allowed me to dive into just coaching and consulting and speaking. And that's really expanded my thought process more. But because I have the real world experience, that's what's helped my coaching business.
Absolutely. So do people find you through your books?
Do people find me through my books? I would say that some do. Your books are, certainly you want them to sell well, but they also add some credibility and to become your business card. But they find me through there, through my website and other social medias, and a lot by referrals now. As I do training with others, I did some with American Health Information Management Association, which covers a lot of medical. I would be contacted by other medical groups that heard about me through them.
Sure. I'm sure when you write your book, you wouldn't really anticipate that it will reach so many people, but only after it's out there in the world, so many new opportunities open up. Like I was so happy to see that you were not just on all these morning shows, but you were also on Hollywood Live with Jack Canfield. So how did that opportunity come about?
So several things. So when I wrote started writing my books, obviously I wanted to get out there. So at first I did have a publicist that helped me get booked on some shows, but I had that person, I would inquire, what are you doing? Show me what you're doing. What is the process? So I learned from them and then started booking myself. Now, a lot of the shows I get invited on by just because they see me elsewhere or the topic fits with them. But I do reach out to others, and I have a package that I send. And I'm like, hey, I think I'd be good, because you cover these types of topics and effective. I'd love to be on your show. So it's a little bit of both. On the Jack Canfield, it was somewhat the same. I reached out to them and for them actively and pursued it. And it was great meeting with Jack Canfield. We have a lot of the same philosophies. He really did like the book and recommended it to his audience, and that was great. And it's nice to have that contact now, as well.
Absolutely. What I also learned from what you mentioned is sometimes when you have to do a task once, you can just outsource it to an agency and they'll do it for you. But you being an author know the importance of being in front of all these media channels, and you know that it's going to happen again and again. So it's really nice to master these kind of skills. Put the time and effort to learn them so that you could do it yourself.
Well, I think that's really important. First of all, I always teach in leadership that uh, to keep learning. My mom
Mm,
used to tell me, find mentors that will always mentor you. But as you get mentored, start mentoring others. And that the more you mentor others, you will be amazed at how much you learn from their learning
mm,
or your involvement with them. But I always say that the day I stop learning will be the day I die. So hopefully I learn today so I don't die.
mm.
But with that being said, um, I enjoy learning, and sometimes it's challenging. I mean, the different platforms and Facebook posts and having it sync up with this and but it's like, well, teach me what this is. I don't mind paying for services. And there's some that when it becomes pretty redundant and automatic, you can offsource. But right now, I think that I was in technology for 21 years, and I saw how that changed constantly, and things change so much that um, it's really important to stay active and to stay informed. If
Sure.
you outsourced it, all of it, and don't stay active, I'd be afraid of missing what's next or what's new or what
Mm.
changes are out there.
That's like really solid advice. So you're talking about change, and I know that you're an expert in crisis management also. So during the pandemic, so many things have changed in organizations. So what are some
Yes.
of the lessons that you now tell the leadership team that work with you, which is very different from how they used to work before?
Well, I mean, yeah. Look, I travel next week to Philadelphia to do some training live, but I've probably been working more virtual with companies. So,
Hmm.
and at first that was like, we're not sure, and so some have struggled with change. It's funny because I've been doing a lot of change management with organizations, and
Right.
then some have embraced change. Those who have
Mm.
embraced it has done better. But
Mm.
the story I tell them is I take them through were you prepared for change or for a crisis? And if not,
Mm.
why? What is it that you did and what is it that you didn't do? Because change will happen even when you don't expect it. So sometimes it might be just industry specific, but no one expected COVID.
Yeah.
When COVID hit, I wrote the book, Leadership Crisis Management, Understanding the Three Stages of Crisis Management. And I first put it out there for free because I thought maybe I can help some organizations survive. But the first stage is really before the crisis. And how do you know when it's before the crisis? But there are some things you need to be doing that help prepare your organization if a crisis
Mm.
occurs. But it also helps your organization be stronger if a crisis doesn't occur. So
Mm.
I take them back to say, here's what maybe you did a little of, but you didn't, or you didn't dive deep enough.
Right.
And so I first say you need to, whenever you have a team, you need to decipher who are truly your leaders and who aren't. And the first part is to teach leadership how to problem solve and make decisions and to empower them that they can. And you will see those who struggle with it that may not be true leaders because critical thinking is important. But when I would I used to be a turnaround specialist, and when I would take over a new team, I would quickly start doing this with a leadership team, teaching them how to problem solve, make decisions, and empower them. And I would truly see who the true leaders were. And I would be specific because I would teach them how I problem solve first, because I
Yeah.
thought it was important to understand my mindset. Here's how I think when a problem occurs. Here's how I solve it. Here are the questions I ask myself. It doesn't mean that you can't use other techniques, but you should use a proven method. But if you're aware of how I think through it, then at least when you bring it to me, you know what questions I'm going to ask. And hopefully
Right.
you will have asked them and answered them themselves. But what happens is when you empower them and you encourage them to make decisions and you reward them for that, eventually you surround yourself with problem solvers. What a
Hmm.
great thing.
Yeah.
And if you haven't done at least that, when a crisis happens, people get paralyzed and they freeze.
Hmm.
The next stage within stage one is I start teaching about the culture and the environment and about habits. That's why I like the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People,
Hmm.
because you need to start doing habits that everything you do becomes instinctful,
Right.
and that it happens automatically. When you first teach the habits, it slows you up, but it actually saves you time. But at least then, as we go through that, they can see. And I said, if you haven't done that, then you need to start doing that now. If you did do that, the organizations that have made problem solvers and taught them about the environment, what I call the first team environment, where it's okay to disagree, but you do things professionally. Then about good habits, the 7 habits of highly effective people. Then
Mhm.
stage 2 is if you're in a crisis, you should be evaluating everything. How are your people doing? How are the processes that you have built working? What improvements need to be made? Can some be made now or
Mhm.
after you get through the crisis? Because once you do all the evaluations of people that are good, who are maybe leaders that aren't in a leadership role, that maybe you might want to step up,
Mhm.
what are the processes and operational things that maybe need changing? When you come out of that crisis, you need to make those changes immediately, and then communicate them, and then move forward with that momentum. So that takes you through the 3 stages, and that's how I work with organizations when they're in it. Because if you haven't done it, can we do some things to help grasp it and start getting our people there? Yes, we can.
Mhm.
And so we quickly walk through those 3 stages and assess where we are.
Thank you actually for walking us through all the 3 stages. And one thing I've noticed about you, Mark, is that you're such a giver. You don't hold anything back. And even in your latest book for aspiring women leaders, I noticed that you're giving away such a fantastic workbook for free inside the book. We call it a reader magnet for
Right.
authors. And that's such a cool strategy. First of all, you're giving so much value up front. Even people who don't buy the book can actually flip through the first few pages and download that workbook for free. And in the back end, they actually become a part of your email list. So was that like a conscious decision to grow your audience?
Yes, it was. I've been mentoring aspiring women leaders for over 25 years. I explained that to Jack Canfield on the TV show.
Mm-hmm.
I just tell women, do add to any leadership team. They make balanced decisions, and I over the mentoring of 25 years, even leaders who were first hired as just to be my administrative assistant, that I saw that they had the skills to grow in leadership, and I worked with them. It's the workbook is what I developed over those 25 years. So, and it's like, let me put it in more formality, and I want to
Mm-hmm.
share it. Right now, although women are 50% of the workforce, they're only 20% of upper management,
Mm-hmm.
10% of C-level, and
Right.
5.1% of CEOs. So
Mm,
you could say, hey, it made a lot of impact, but there's a lot of room for growth, and it really
absolutely.
benefits organizations as they expand on it. But it's a process that I've seen success and failure if one, they take a shortcut. Shortcuts get you lost. The name of my first book. But if they work the process and build a strong foundation, and that's what that leadership book does with the 52-page workbook. And we made it it's a fillable PDF. So we did everything to make it easy.
Right.
That if they follow the story and work the workbook, they can help build a good foundation. And if you look at the endorsements, Amazing Women Nation, Women Prosperity Network, some great endorsements to where even those women who run networks of women supporting women, they're like, wow, I wish I had this when I started out, because they knew the struggles that they went through.
Yeah.
And, there's a anonymous saying out there that says, behind every successful woman are other women who have her back. And I found that that's so very true, because there's some great women support networks out there. And we teach
Mm,
that in the book on how do you find these, but how do you evaluate which one's right for you? And then
mm.
how do you, when you visit them, come back and decide, yes, these are the ones. And then you put together your action plan, utilizing your support networks as well. So all the things that I feel that's important, because I just want them to be successful.
Amazing, Mark. I'm so inspired by how your work is not just touching one segment of the population, but your books and your programs are impacting people across all age groups, which is really commendable. So finally, what would be your advice for aspiring authors who know that they are experts at something, but something is holding them back from writing their first book?
Well, I would say several things. First of all, get outside your comfort zone. And that's probably the biggest thing is like we tell ourselves we're not good enough. Start writing, get it out there and get opinions of others. And, humility is a strength, not a weakness. One of my mom's sayings. So that's in the book, Leadership Lessons from Mom. But have the ability to listen, but get with other authors. I haven't found an author that hasn't been willing to help others or to give advice. Even, Jack Canfield, you would think he wouldn't have time for me, and we had great conversations, and other authors just want other authors to be successful. But there's great support networks for authors out there on Facebook or in other places.
You don't have to be alone, right? You can take
get
the
out
support.
there, but write something, even write an outline and say, hey, what do you think? Here's what I'm thinking about writing about, and then listen to what you hear.
Very well said, Mark. Thank you so much for your time. And where can our listeners and viewers find out more about you?
Well, I have a website, markvillareal.com, and it has all my contacts. So you could connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. And mark@markvillareal.com is my email as well.
Thank you so much, Mark, once again for coming on Author Success Show. I just love this conversation.
Thank you for having me.